Hello! We're back today learning some applied accessibility and perhaps some more because this one's pretty short. I hope everybody's having a good day. And let's just jump into it, shall we? Doing karatewow.jpg. Oh, wow. All right. Applied accessibility. Add a text alternative to images for visually impaired accessibility. It's likely you've seen an alt attribute on an image tag in other challenges. Alt text describes the content of the image and provides a text alternative. This helps in case the image fails to load or can't be seen by the user. It's also used by search engines to understand what an image contains to include it in search results. Here's an example. People with visual impairments rely on screen readers to convert web content to an audio interface. They won't get information if it's only presented visually. For images, screen readers can access the alt attribute and read its contents to deliver key information. Good alt text is short but descriptive and meant to briefly convey the meaning of the image. You should always include an alt attribute on your image. Per HTML5 specification, this is now considered mandatory. Camper Cat happens to be both a coding ninja and an actual ninja, and is building a website to share his knowledge. The profile picture he wants to use shows his skills and should be appreciated by all site visitors. Add an alt attribute in the image tag that explains Camper Cat is doing karate. The image source doesn't link to an actual file, so you should see the alt text in the display. So it wants us to create an alt attribute here. Ooh, it doesn't like that. Camper Cat is doing karate. And there you have it. Know when alt text should be left blank. In the last challenge, you learned that including an alt attribute on image tags is mandatory. However, sometimes images are grouped with a caption already describing them, or are used for decoration only. In these cases, alt text may seem redundant or unnecessary. In situations when an image is already explained with the text content or does not add meaning to a page, the image still needs an alt attribute, but it can be set to an empty string. Here's an example. Background images usually fall under the decorative label as well. However, they are typically applied with CSS rules and therefore not part of the markup screen reader's process. Note, for images with a caption, you may still want to include alt text since it helps search engines catalog the content of the image. Camper Cat has coded a skeleton page for the blog of his website. He's planning to add a visual break between his two articles with a decorative image of a samurai sword. Add an alt attribute to the image tag and set it to an empty string. Note that the image source doesn't link to an actual file. Don't worry, there are no swords showing in this. Okay. So you get sort of the broken image. All right. Use headings to show hierarchical relationships of content. Headings H1 through H6 elements are workhorse tags that help provide structure and labeling to your content. Screen readers can be set to read only the headings on a page so that the user gets a summary. This means it's important for the heading tags in your markup to have semantic meaning and relate to each other, not to be picked merely for their size value. Semantic meaning means that the tag you use around the content indicates the type of information it contains. If you were writing a paper with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, it wouldn't make much sense to put the conclusion as a subsection of the body in your outline. It should be its own section. Similarly, The heading tags in a web page need to go in order and indicate the hierarchical relationships of your content. Headings with equal or higher rank start new implied sections. Headings with lower rank start subsections of the previous one. As an example, a page with an H2 element followed by several subsections labeled with H4 tags would confuse a screen reader user. With 6 choices, it's tempting to use a tag because it looks better in a browser, but you can use CSS to edit the relative sizing. One final point, each page should always have one and only one H1 element, which is the main subject of your content. This and the other headings are used in part by search engines to understand the topic of the page. Camper Cat wants a page on his site dedicated to becoming a ninja. Help him fix the headings so his markup gives semantic meaning to the content and shows the proper parent-child relationships of his sections. Change all the H5 tags to the proper heading level to indicate they are subsections of the H2 ones. So it wants us to make these H3s. And we're going to use the fancy multiple mouse select. You just hold Alt or some kind of modifier. Ooh, not there. There. Oh, and we didn't want it here. We don't want it here. No. We just want it here. No. Here. Here. So now we can just delete all of them in one go, H3. And that should do it. Maybe later. Jump straight to the content using the main element. HTML5 introduced a number of new elements that give developers more options while also incorporating accessibility features. These tags include main, header, footer, nav, article, and section, among others. By default, a browser rendered these elements similarly to the humble div. However, using them where appropriate gives additional meaning in your markup. The tag name alone can indicate the type of information it contains, which adds semantic meaning to that content. Excuse me. Assistive technologies can access this information to provide better page summary or navigation options to their users. The main element is used to wrap, you guessed it, the main content, and there should be only one per page. It's meant to surround the information that's related to the central topic of your page. It's not meant to include items that repeat across pages, like navigation links or banners. Main tag also has an embedded landmark feature that assistive technology can use to quickly navigate to the main content. If you ever seen a jump to main content link at the top of a page, using a main tag automatically gives assistive devices that functionality. Camper Cat has some big ideas for his ninja weapons page. Help him set up his markup by adding opening and closing main tags between the header and footer, covered in other challenges. Keep the main tags empty for now. Mean. Not save. Let's run the tests. Yeah. All right. Wrap content in the article element. Article is another one of the new HTML5 elements that adds semantic meaning to your markup. Article is a sectioning element and is used to wrap independent, self-contained content. The tag works well with blog entries, forum posts, or news articles. Determining whether content can stand alone is usually a judgment call, but there are a couple simple tests you can use. Ask yourself, if you removed all surrounding context, would that content still make sense? Similarly, for text, would the content hold up if it were in an RSS feed? Remember that folks using assistive technologies rely on organized, semantically meaningful markup to better understand your work. Note about section and div. The section element is also new with HTML5 and has a slightly different semantic meaning than article. An article is for standalone content, and a section is for grouping thematically related content. They can be used within each other as needed. For example, if a book is the article, then each chapter is a section. When there is no relationship between groups of content, then use a div. We use divs to group content, sections to group related content, articles to group independent, self-contained content. Campercat used article tags to wrap the posts on his blog page, but he forgot to use them around the top one. Change the div tag to use an article instead. Boom. Got him. Applied accessibility. You know what we need right now? Some tunes is what we need. It's awfully quiet. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Seems good. All right. Applied accessibility. Make screen reader navigation easier with the header landmark. The next HTML5 element that adds semantic meaning and improves accessibility is the header tag. It's used to wrap introductory information or navigation links for its parent tag, and works well around content that's repeated at the top on multiple pages. Header shares the embedded landmark feature you saw with main, allowing assistive technologies to quickly navigate to that content. Header is meant for use in the body tag of your HTML document. This is different than the head element, which contains the page's title, meta information, etc. Campercat is writing some great articles about Ninja training and wants to add a page for them to his site. Change the top div that currently contains the H1 to a header tag instead. Boom. Make screen reader navigation easier with the nav landmark. The nav element is another HTML5 item with the embedded landmark feature for easy screen reader navigation. This tag is meant to wrap around the main navigation links in your page. There are repeated site links at the bottom of the page. It isn't necessary to mark up those with a nav tag as well. Using a footer, covered in the next challenge, is sufficient. That's good to know. That's something that I've not really had down pat, so that's cool. Campercat included navigation links at the top of his training page, but wrapped them in a div. Change the div to a nav tag to improve accessibility on the page. Make screen reader navigation easier with the footer landmark. Similar to header and nav, the footer element has a built-in landmark feature that allows assistive devices to quickly navigate to it. It's primarily used to contain copyright information or links to related documents that usually sit at the bottom of the page. Campercat's training page is making good progress. Change the div he used to wrap his copyright information at the bottom of the page to a footer element. Oh, not. Wow, okay. Words. Improve accessibility of audio content with the audio element. HTML's audio element gives semantic meaning when it wraps sound or audio stream content in your markup. Audio content also needs a text alternative to be accessible to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. This can be done with nearby text on the page or a link to a transcript. The audio tag supports the controls attribute. This shows the browser default play, pause, and other controls, and supports keyboard functionality. This is a Boolean attribute, meaning it does not need a value. Present on the tag turns the setting on. Here's an example. Multimedia content usually has both visual and auditory components. It needs synchronized captions and a transcript so users with a visual and or auditory impairments can access it. Generally, a web developer is not responsible for creating the caption or transcript, but needs to know how to include them. Time to take a break from Camper Cat and meet fellow camper Xerxiax, a champion of accessibility and a screen reader user. To hear a clip of his screen reader in action, add an audio element after the P tag. Include the controls attribute, then place a source tag inside the audio tags with the source attribute set to that. So we're gonna copy and paste this. We did not get last audio tag. It doesn't need an ID. The source needs to be set to this URL right here. Come on now. And the type is set for us since we copy and pasted. Now we can give it a listen. That's normal speed. Oh my god, my brain hurts. Applied accessibility. Improved chart accessibility with the figure element. In HTML5 introduced the figure element along with the related fig caption. Used together, these items wrap a visual representation like an image, diagram, or chart along with its caption. This gives us a twofold accessibility boost by both semantically grouping related content and providing a text alternative that explains the figure. For data visualizations like charts, the caption can be used to briefly note the trends or conclusions for users with visual impairments. Another challenge covers how to move a table version of the charts data off-screen using CSS for screen reader users. Here's an example. Note that the fig caption goes inside the figure tags and can be combined with other elements. Campercat is hard at work creating a stacked bar chart showing the amount of time per week to spend training in stealth combat and weapons. Help him structure his page better by changing the div tag he used to a figure tag and the P tag that surrounds the caption to a fig caption tag. So it wants us to change this to a fig, and then this to fig caption. There is no actual my bad. My bad. Improve form field accessibility with the label element. Improving accessibility with semantic HTML markup applies to using both appropriate tag names as well as attributes. The next several challenges cover some important scenarios using attributes and forms. The label tag wraps the text for a specific form control item, usually the name or label for a choice. This ties meaning to the item and makes the form more readable. The for attribute on a label tag explicitly associates that label with a form control and is used by screen readers. You learned about radio buttons and their labels in a lesson in the basic HTML section. In that lesson, we wrapped the radio button input element inside a label element along with the label text in order to make that text clickable. Another way to achieve this is by using the for attribute as explained in the lesson. The value of the for attribute must be the same as the value of the ID of the form control. Here's an example. Camper Cat expects a lot of interest in his thoughtful blog post and wants to include an email sign-up form. Add a for attribute on the email label that matches the ID on its input field. So that means we can click this and it will put us in here. Alright, wrap radio buttons in a field set element for better accessibility. The next form topic covers accessibility of radio buttons. Each choice is given a label with a for attribute tying it to the ID of the corresponding item as covered in the last challenge. Since radio buttons often come in a group where the user must choose one, there's a way to semantically show the choices are part of a set. The field set tag surrounds the entire group of radio buttons to achieve this. It often uses a legend tag to provide a description for the grouping, which is read by screen readers for each choice in the field set element. The field set wrapper and legend tags are not necessary when the choices are self-explanatory, like a gender selection. Using a label with the for attribute for each radio button is sufficient. Here's an example. Camper Cat wants information about the ninja level of his users when they sign up for his email list. He added a set of radio buttons and learned from our last lesson to use label tags with for attributes for each choice. Go Camper Cat! However, his code still needs some help. Change the div tag surrounding the radio buttons to a field set tag and change the p tag inside of it to a legend. So once let's change this to field set, and this is the legend. Fancy. Add an accessible date picker. Forms often include the input field, which can be used to create several different form controls. The type attribute on this element indicates what kind of input will be created. You may have noticed the text and submit input types in prior challenges, and HTML5 introduced an option to specify a date field. Depending on the browser's support, a date picker shows up in the input field when it's in focus, which makes filling in a form easier for all users. For older browsers, the type will default to text, so it helps to show users the expected date format in the label, where it's a placeholder text just in case. Here's an example. Camper Cat is setting up a Mortal Kombat tournament and wants to ask his competitors to see what date works best. Add an input tag with a type attribute of date, and an ID attribute of pick date, and a name attribute of date. Boom. Standardized times with the HTML5 datetime attribute. Continuing with the date theme, HTML5 also introduced the time element along with a datetime attribute to standardize times. This is an inline element that can wrap a date or time on a page. A valid format of the date is held by the datetime attribute. This is the value accessed by assistive devices. It helps avoid confusion by stating a standardized version of a time, even if it's written in an informal or colloquial manner in the text. Here's an example. Master Camper Cat officiated cage match between Goro and Scorpion. Time, date, time, blah, 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 last Wednesday, which ended in a draw. Camper Cat's Mortal Kombat survey results are in. Wrap a time tag around the text Thursday, September 15th. I don't think that's supposed to be like that. And add, or maybe it is. And add a date time to attribute to it set to that. Okay. So time, date time equals time, and then it wants 2001 1609. All right. Great. Make elements only visible to a screen reader by using custom CSS. Have you noticed that all of the applied accessibility challenges so far haven't used any CSS? This is to show the importance of a logical document outline and using semantically meaningful tags around your content before introducing the visual design aspect. However, CSS's magic can also improve accessibility on your page when you want to visually hide content meant only for screen readers. This happens when information is in a visual format like a chart, but screen reader users need an alternative presentation, like a table, to access the data. CSS is used to position the screen reader only elements off the visual area of the browser window. Here's an example of the CSS rule that accomplishes this. Note, the following CSS approaches will not do the same thing. Display none or visibly hidden hides content for everyone, including screen readers. 0 values for pixel sizes, such as width 0, height 0, removes the element from the flow of your document, meaning screen readers will ignore it. Camper Cat created a really cool stacked bar chart for his training page and put the data into a table for his visually impaired users. The table already has an SR only class, but the CSS rule aren't filled yet. Give the position an absolute value. Absolute left of a whole bunch of pixels. Boom. Improve readability with high contrast text. Low contrast between the foreground and background colors can make text difficult to read. Sufficient contrast improves the readability of your content, but what exactly does sufficient mean? Web Content Accessibility Guidelines recommend at least 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio for normal text. The ratio is calculated by comparing the relative luminance values of the two colors. This ranges from 1 to 1 for the same color or no contrast, or 21 to 1 for white against black, the strongest contrast. There are many contrast checking tools available online that calculate this ratio for you. Camper Cat's choice of light gray text on a white background for his recent blog post has a 1.5 to 1 contrast ratio, making it hard to read. Change the color of the text from the current gray to a darker gray to improve the contrast ratio to 6 to 1. Avoid color blindness issues by using sufficient contrast. Color is a large part of visual design, but its use introduces two accessibility issues. First, color alone should not be used as the only way to convey important information because screen reader users won't see it. Second, foreground and background colors need sufficient contrast so colorblind users can distinguish them. Previous challenges covered having text alternatives to address the first issue. The last challenge introduced contrast checking tools to help with the second. The WCAG recommended contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 applies for color use as well as grayscale combinations. Colorblind users have trouble distinguishing some colors from others, usually in hue, but sometimes lightness as well. You may recall the contrast ratio is calculated using the relative luminance or lightness values of the foreground and background colors. In practice, the 4.5 to 1 ratio can be reached by darkening the darker color and lightening the lighter one with the aid of a color contrast checker. Darker colors on the color wheel are considered to be blues, violets, magentas, and reds, whereas lighter colors are oranges, yellows, greens, and blue-greens. Campercat is experimenting with using color for his blog text and background, but his current combination of a greenish background color with a maroon text color has a 2.5 to 1 contrast ratio. You can easily adjust the lightness of the colors since he declared them using the CSS-HSL property, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. By changing the third argument, increase the background color lightness value from 35% to 55% and decrease the color lightness value from 20% to 15%. This improves the contrast ratio to 5.9 to 1. And decrease the color lightness value from 20 to 15. Looks like poo, but yeah. Avoid color blindness issues by carefully choosing colors that convey information. There are various forms of color blindness. These can range from a reduced sensitivity to a certain wavelength of light to the inability to see color at all. The most common form is a reduced sensitivity to detect greens. For example, if two similar green colors are the foreground and the background color of your content, a colorblind user may not be able to distinguish them. Close colors can be thought of as neighbors on the color wheel, and those combinations should be avoided when conveying important information. Note, some online color picking tools include visual simulations of how colors appear for different types of color blindness. These are great resources in addition to online contrast checking calculators. Campercat is testing different styles for an important button, but the yellow background color and the green text color are neighboring hues on the color wheel and virtually indistinguishable for some colorblind users. Their similar lightness also fails the contrast ratio check. Change the text color to a dark blue to solve both problems. Boom. Delete internet. Well, we don't want to do that. Links meaning by using descriptive link text. Excuse me. Screen reader users have different options for what type of content their device reads. This includes skipping to or over landmark elements, jumping to the main content, or getting a page summary from the headings. Another option is to only hear the links available on a page. Screen readers do this by reading the link text or what's between the anchor aid tags. Having a list of click here or read more links isn't helpful. Instead, you should use a brief but descriptive text within the aid tags to provide more meaning for these users. The The link text that CamperCat is using is not very descriptive without the surrounding context. Move the anchor A tags so they wrap around the text information about batteries instead of click here. Nice. Make links navigatable with HTML access keys. HTML offers the access key attribute to specify a shortcut key to activate or bring focus to an element. This can make navigation more efficient for keyboard-only users. HTML5 allows this attribute to be used on any element, but it's particularly useful when it's used with interactive ones. This includes links, buttons, and form controls. Here's an example. Button, access key B, important button. CamperCat wants the links around the two blog article titles to have keyboard shortcuts so that his site's users can quickly navigate to the full story. Add an access key attribute to both links and set the first one to G for Garfield and the second one for Chuck Norris. Got him. Applied accessibility. Use tab index to add keyboard focus to an element. The HTML tab index attribute has three distinct functions relating to an element's keyboard focus. When it's on a tag, it indicates that the element can be focused on. The value, an integer that's positive, negative, or 0, determines that behavior. Certain elements, such as links and form controls, automatically receive keyboard focus when a user tabs through a page. It's in the same order as the elements come in the HTML source markup. This same functionality can be given to other elements, such as div, span, and p, by placing a tab index equals 0 attribute on them. Here's an example. A negative tab index value, typically -1, indicates that an element is focusable but is not reachable by the keyboard. This method is generally used to bring focus to content programmatically, like when a div used for a pop-up window is activated. It is beyond the scope of these challenges. CamperCat created a new survey to collect information about his users. He knows input fields automatically get keyboard focus, but he wants to make sure his keyboard users pause at these instructions while tabbing through the items. Add a tab index attribute to the p tag and set its value to 0. Bonus. Using tab index also enables the CSS pseudoclass focus to work on the p tag. Okay. All right. Pretty good. Use tab index to specify the order of keyboard focus for several elements. The tab index attribute also specifies the exact tab order of elements. This is achieved when the value of the attribute is set to a positive number of 1 or higher. Setting a tab index equals 1 will bring keyboard focus to that element first. Then it cycles through the sequence of specified tab index values, 2, 3, etc., before moving to the default tab index 0 items. It's important to note that when the tab order is set this way, it overrides the default order, which uses the HTML source. This may confuse users who are expecting to start navigation from the top of the page. This technique may be necessary in some circumstances, but in terms of accessibility, take care before applying it. Here's an example. I get keyboard focus, and I get it first, second, okay. Campercat has a search field on his inspirational quotes page that he plans to position in the upper right corner with CSS. He wants the search input and submit input form controls to be the first items in the tab order. Add a tab index attribute set to 1 to search, and a tab index attribute set to 2 to the submit input. Alright. Tab index for both of these equals, and then we'll do why is it not working? Okay. Oh well. All right, that covers that. Took 46 minutes. I think we'll do this one as well. All right. Introduction to the responsive web design challenges. Today, there are many types of devices that can access the web. They range from large desktop computers to small mobile phones. These devices have different screen sizes, resolutions, and processing power. Responsive web design is an approach to designing web content that responds to the constraints of different devices. The page structure and CSS rules should be flexible to accommodate these differences. In general, design the page's CSS to your target audience. If you expect most of your traffic to be from mobile users, take a mobile-first approach, then add conditional rules for larger screen sizes. If your visitors are desktop users, then design for larger screens with conditional rules for smaller screen sizes. CSS gives you the tools to write different style rules, then apply them depending on the device displaying the page. This section will cover the basic ways to use CSS for responsive web design. Alright, let's create a media query. Media queries are a new technique introduced in CSS3 that changed the presentation of content based on different viewport sizes. The viewport is a user's visible area of a web page and is different depending on the device used to access the site. Media queries consist of the media type, and if that media type matches the type of the device that the document is displayed on, the styles are applied. You can have as many selectors and styles inside your media query as you want. Here's an example of a media query that returns the content when the device's width is less than or equal to 100 pixels. And the following media query returns the content when the device's height is more than or equal to 350 pixels. Remember, the CSS inside the media query is applied only if the media type matches that of the device being used. Add a media query so that the p tag has a font size of 10 pixels when the device's height is less than or equal to 800 pixels. So for that, we want a max height, I believe. And P font size 10 pixels. And this needs to change to 8, which, so yeah, seems to have worked. P element should have the font size of text 10 pixels when the device height is less than or equal to 800 pixels. That would be a max width of 800 pixels, right? Declare a media query for devices with a height less than or equal to, a height. Your P element should have the font size of 10 pixels when the device height is less than or equal to 800 pixels. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not this. Yeah, so P element should have the font size of 10 pixels when the device height is less than or equal to 800 pixels. Declare a media query. Yeah, that's all of the things that I am doing. Do you want me to format it so it's on one line or something stupid? What's your problem? What am I doing wrong? All right, let's get a hint. Are there no hints for this? Yeah, cool. I kind of just want your thing to work when it's given the code. I should make it work. That's what I want. It's clearly doing what it wants you to do. I don't understand. I don't understand. That's what it has though. So why are you wrong? What? I don't understand. Font size 10. I don't. What? Yep. Yep, gotcha. I don't. This is fucking stupid. Yep. At media. Yep. 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 I don't. So it's just acting like I have nothing here. What? Why? Why? I don't understand. I don't understand. Media query. Okay. Well, Firefox it is. It's right at media. Min height, or wait, max height. 800 pixels. We do this. P, we do this. Font size 10 pixels. End it. Let's test it. You've done it. Congratulations. All right. Close all this nonsense. We'll go to the curriculum, scroll down here. All right. Responsive web design principles make an image responsive. Making images responsive with CSS is actually very simple. Instead of applying an absolute width to an element, you can use max width, display block, height auto. The max width property of 100% scales the images to fit the width of its container, but the image won't stretch wider than its original width. Setting the display property to block changes the image from an inline element, its default, to a block element on its own line. The height property of auto keeps the original aspect ratio of the image. Add style rules for the image tag to make it responsive to the size of its container. It should display as a block level element, it should fit the full width of its container without stretching, and it should keep its original aspect size. I mean, it basically just wants us to type all this stuff that we could just copy and paste, but I'll type it. Oh, display black. That's funny. Is it not actually changing the code? What's going on here? Whatever. Responsive web design principle uses a retina image for higher resolution displays. The simplest way to make your images appear retina and optimize them for retina displays is to define their width and height values as only half of what the original file is. Here is an example of an image that is only using half of the original height and width. Set the width and height of the image tag to half of their original values. In this case, both original height and the original width are 200 pixels. Boom. Make typography responsive. Instead of using EM or PX to size text, you can use viewport units to responsive typography. Viewport units, like percentages, are relative units, but they are based off different items. Viewport units are relative to the viewport dimensions with their height of a device, and percentages are relative to the size of the parent container element. The 4 different viewport units are VW, VH, Vmin, and Vmax. VW would be 10%. 10 VW would be 10% of the viewport's width. 3 VH would be 3% of the viewport's height. 70 Vmin would be 70% of the viewport's smaller dimension, height versus width. 100 Vmax would be 100% of the viewport's bigger dimension, height versus width. Set the width of the H2 tag to 80% of the viewport's width and the width of the paragraph as a 70% of the viewport's smaller dimension. So we want VW. No, we want H2 width to be 10 VW. Nope. 80 VW. And then the width of the paragraph should be 75 Vmin. Not Vim, Vmin. Introduction. Okay, this is the next step. It makes me real sad that this isn't showing up. It's completed because we completed it. Good. All right. All right. It's been real fun. I will be back later tonight, 8 p.m. EST, for some Clash Royale. And I'm here every Monday through Thursday, 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. Afternoon streams typically are code related. And nighttime streams are for fun and games. Anyway, I'll be back later tonight. Hope to see you there.